I always knew my parents loved my brother more. It wasn't something they said out loud, but their actions spoke louder than words. While Ethan got whatever he wanted, a new gaming console, expensive sneakers, the latest phone, I was the one expected to cook, clean, and handle all the household chores. If I ever complained, my mom would sigh and say, "You're a girl, Sophia. You should learn responsibility." My dad would shake his head and remind me how Ethan was too busy with school and needed to focus, but I was in school too. I had homework, projects, dreams of my own. None of that mattered. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe all families work this way. But as I got older, I saw the truth. Ethan was the golden child, and I was just there to make his life easier. He never lifted a finger. If a plate needed washing, I had to do it. If something was left on the floor, it was my job to pick it up. They even handed him my birthday money once, saying, "Ethan needs a new laptop for school, and you don't really need anything right now." I stood there, holding back tears, as my own gift was taken from me. And Ethan? He didn't even say thank you. I stopped arguing. I stopped expecting fairness. Instead, I watched. I listened. I learned how my parents managed money, how they spent everything on Ethan while making me feel guilty for every penny I needed. I saw how they let him skip responsibilities, because they believed he was too important to be bothered with ordinary tasks. What they never realized was that while they ignored me, I was planning. The turning point came on my 17th birthday. My parents didn't even wish me before handing me a bill. "You need to start contributing," my dad said, pushing it toward me. It was rent, for my own room. Ethan, of course, didn't have to pay anything. "It's only fair," my mom added. "You're old enough now." I looked at Ethan, slouched on the couch with his brand new phone in hand, bought with their money, and something inside me snapped. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled and said, "All right." They had no idea what was coming. I had been saving for years. Every small job I could find, every extra tip, every coin I could stash away, I hid it all. I worked quietly while my parents thought they were teaching me responsibility. In reality, they were giving me a reason to leave. I didn't spend my money on clothes or entertainment like Ethan. I researched. I learned about finances. I figured out how to open an account in my name, separate from them, separate from their control. I found a cheap place to rent, signed up for extra shifts, and waited for the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. One evening, my parents called me downstairs. "Ethan wants to go on a trip with his friends," my mom said casually, stirring her tea. "He needs some extra money, and since you've been saving so much, we thought you could help." She smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. My dad nodded, as if they had just made a logical decision. Ethan didn't even look at me. He just stretched, already assuming I would hand over the money like I always did. I laughed. Not just a small chuckle, but a full, uncontrollable laugh. My mother's smile faded. My dad frowned. "Sophia, what's funny?" My laughter died down, and I looked at them, really looked at them. The people who had never seen me as more than a servant. The ones who had drained me for years. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Actually, yeah, something is funny. You think I'm going to give you my money?" The room went silent. I stood up, reached into my pocket, and pulled out an envelope. Inside were the copies of my lease, my bank statement, and a letter of resignation from the house. "I'm moving out," I said, placing it on the table. "I've already signed the papers. My bags are packed." My mother gasped. My father's face turned red. "You're being ridiculous," he snapped. "You can't just leave." "Watch me." Ethan finally looked up from his phone. "Wait, who's going to do all the chores?" he asked, frowning. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his own comfort. That was all I needed to hear. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. My mother tried to guilt me. "Sophia, after everything we've done for you?" I turned, tilting my head. "What exactly have you done for me?" They had no answer. For the first time, they had nothing to say. I left without another word. The fallout was delicious. I didn't look back, but I heard the stories. My parents struggled. Without me, the house was a mess. My mom had to start doing the chores she had ignored for years. My dad had to actually manage his own bills. And Ethan, he crumbled. Without me there to clean up after him, to make sure he was fed, to smooth out all the rough edges in his life, he flailed like a child lost in a storm. Then the inevitable happened. My parents called me. First, it was angry voicemails demanding I come home. Then it turned into guilt tripping. "We miss you, Sophia. Ethan is struggling. Don't you care about your family?" The desperation grew over time. Their perfect son had no idea how to survive in the real world. I never went back. I built my own life. I worked hard, invested smartly, and made sure that every dollar I earned was mine alone. Years later, I owned my own apartment, my own business, my own freedom. One day, my father called again. "We need help with some expenses, Sophia," he said, his voice hesitant. "Ethan is struggling. He hasn't been able to find stable work." I almost laughed again. Instead, I simply said, "I'm sure he'll figure it out." Then I hung up. Ethan never figured it out. My parents were forced to accept that their golden child wasn't so golden without someone else carrying him. Meanwhile, I thrived. They had spent years treating me like I was worth less than my brother, never realizing I was the one who would succeed. They taught me responsibility, but they never expected me to use it to walk away. Years passed, and the gap between my life and theirs grew wider. I had carved out a future for myself, one they never believed I was capable of achieving. Meanwhile, my parents and Ethan were sinking. The financial struggles I had predicted came true. Without me to handle things, their expenses piled up. My father lost control of the household finances. My mother was exhausted from finally having to do all the work she once shoved onto me. And Ethan, well, Ethan remained Ethan. I heard bits and pieces from distant relatives and old neighbors. My parents had tried to push Ethan into getting a stable job, but he never lasted anywhere for long. Employers didn't care that he was the golden child at home. He was lazy, entitled, and assumed the world owed him something just because his parents had spoiled him rotten. He moved from one failed job to the next, always blaming someone else for his failures, his boss, his coworkers, bad luck, unfair expectations, never himself. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was Ethan. "Sophia, I know we haven't talked in a while. I just wanted to say I miss you. Things have been rough here. Mom and Dad don't understand how hard things are for me. They're making me do all the work you used to do. It's exhausting. I don't know how you managed. Listen, I could really use your help right now. Maybe we can catch up." I stared at my phone, rereading the message. No apology, no acknowledgement of how I had been treated, just a self-pitying complaint and a thinly veiled request for me to come back and fix his life. I didn't reply. The next message came a few days later, more desperate. "Come on, Sophia, don't be like this. I know things weren't always fair, but we're family. Mom and Dad are thinking about selling the house. We're really struggling. Maybe you can help out? You're doing well, right?" I let out a small, humorless laugh. So that was it. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They didn't suddenly realize they had been unfair. They just wanted my money. I blocked his number. Then, as if the universe was testing me, my mother called that evening. I let it go to voicemail, knowing exactly what was coming. I played the message as I sipped my evening tea, my feet resting on the balcony of my apartment, overlooking the city I had built my life in. "Sophia, sweetheart." My mother's voice was softer than I remembered, almost hesitant. "I know we had our disagreements. I know things weren't perfect. But you have to understand, we did what we thought was best. You were always so strong, so capable. That's why we relied on you so much. We never thought you'd leave us like this." I rolled my eyes. Even now she was twisting the narrative, making it sound like I had abandoned them, instead of acknowledging that they had pushed me away. She continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father and I, we're not as young as we used to be. And Ethan, well, he's trying. He's really trying. But things are hard for him. He's been through a lot. We're thinking of selling the house, but the market isn't great right now. Maybe you could help? Just a little. We're family after all." Family. The word meant nothing coming from her. I deleted the voicemail. That night, I reflected on everything. If I had stayed, I would have been stuck in that house forever. weighed down by responsibilities that were never mine to carry. I would have been drained dry, my ambitions crushed under the burden of a family that only saw me as a tool. Walking away was the best thing I ever did. And now, they were drowning in the very mess they had created. I had been their backbone, their support system, their safety net. And now that I was gone, they were left with the son they had coddled, the son they had chosen to prioritize over me. I slept peacefully that night. The next morning, I received an email. It was from my father this time, short, to the point. Sophia, if you don't want to help your family, just say so. But don't forget, blood is thicker than water. One day you might need us. I shook my head and typed a simple response. Blood may be thicker than water, but respect is worth more than both. I needed you once, and you turned me into a servant. Now you need me, and I choose myself. Good luck. I hit send. And just like that, I closed the last open door to my past. Months passed, and the messages stopped. It was as if, after my final email, my parents finally understood that I was truly gone. I wasn't their backup plan, their financial safety net, or their emotional punching bag. I was done. Life without their constant demands felt lighter. I focused on growing my career, expanding my independence, and enjoying the peace that came with knowing no one could take advantage of me anymore. My bank account was mine alone, my home was a space I controlled, and my time was spent on things that mattered to me, not endless chores and unappreciated sacrifices. Then, one afternoon, while I was working on a project at my office, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won. Hello? A hesitant voice came through the line. Sophia? I knew that voice immediately. Amanda, my mother's younger sister. The one relative who had always seemed uncomfortable with how my parents treated me but never stepped in to help. I sighed. What is it, Amanda? There was an awkward silence before she finally spoke. I just thought you should know. Your parents lost the house. I didn't react. I had seen it coming. The signs had been there for years. And I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hesitated again. They moved in with Ethan, but it's not going well. Now that caught my attention. Not going well, I repeated. Leaning back in my chair, Amanda sighed. Ethan is struggling more than they realized. He barely keeps a job, and when he does, it doesn't last long. His debts have piled up, and now, with your parents living with him, things are worse. They thought he'd take care of them in their old age, but, well, she trailed off. I almost laughed at the irony. The same parents who had sacrificed everything to make Ethan's life easy were now entirely dependent on him. And Ethan, the golden child, the one they had always prioritized over me, couldn't even take care of himself. Amanda continued, her voice lowering as if she didn't want to be overheard. They were hoping you'd reach out. They wouldn't say it outright, but I could tell. They're embarrassed, but they're also desperate. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting her words sink in. My parents were desperate. The same people who had forced me to work while Ethan lived in luxury. The same people who made me pay rent while he got everything for free. The same people who ignored my struggles, dismissed my efforts, and only reached out when they needed something. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes. Amanda, let me ask you something. Of course, she said quickly. When I was younger, when my parents treated me like a maid, when they stole my birthday money for Ethan, when they made me feel like I was nothing, where were you? Silence. I let it hang in the air. After a long pause, she whispered, I didn't know what to say. I shook my head. And now, I don't know what to say either. She let out a shaky breath. I understand. Good, I said simply, because I'm not coming back. Tell them I wish them well, but I have nothing left to give. I ended the call. For a brief moment, a small voice in my head wondered if I was being cruel. But then I remembered all the times I had cried myself to sleep, all the times I had worked until exhaustion while my brother played, all the times I had been made to feel like I was less. No, I wasn't being cruel. I was just finally giving them exactly what they had given me. Nothing. A year passed, and for the first time in my life, I was completely free. No guilt, no obligation, no weight of expectation dragging me down. My business was thriving, My personal life was peaceful, and I had surrounded myself with people who valued me, not for what I could do for them, but for who I was. Then, one evening, as I was closing up my office, an email popped up on my phone. The subject line was blank. The sender? Ethan. I almost deleted it without reading, but something in me wanted to see what he had to say. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. Either way, I opened it. Sophia, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I need to try. Things are really bad. Mom and Dad don't know I'm reaching out, but they're struggling, and I don't know what to do. They have no savings, no income, and they're completely relying on me. But I can barely take care of myself. They're different now. They don't talk about you the way they used to. I think they realize what they did, even if they'll never admit it out loud. I get it now. What they did to you. How unfair it was. I didn't see it before, but I do now. I won't lie, I need help. Not just for them, but for me. I messed up. I thought life would always be easy because that's how it was when we were kids. I thought people would just hand me things the way Mom and Dad did. But the real world doesn't work like that. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I won't blame you if you ignore this. But if there's even the slightest chance that you can help, even just advice, please let me know. I'm sorry. I really am. Ethan. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was the first time I had ever heard Ethan admit fault. The first time he had acknowledged what had happened to me, what our parents had done. For a brief moment, I considered replying. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he had finally grown up. But then I remembered all the times I had needed help, and no one came. All the times I had been exhausted, overwhelmed, desperate for someone to notice my pain. And Ethan had turned a blind eye because it was easier to enjoy the privileges our parents handed him. People only see the truth when they suffer, when their comfort is ripped away. I wasn't responsible for him. I wasn't responsible for my parents. They had all made their choices. Now, they had to live with them. Without a second thought, I archived the email. I shut off my phone, grabbed my bag, and walked out of my office into the night. The air was crisp, fresh, filled with possibility. I had a future to focus on, a life to live. For the first time, Ethan and my parents weren't my problem. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. Months passed, and my life only kept getting better. My business expanded, my friendships deepened, and every single day, I woke up feeling lighter. There was no weight of expectation, no endless burden of responsibility that wasn't mine to carry. I had built something for myself, and no one could take it away. My parents and Ethan, on the other hand, were sinking deeper. I had stopped keeping track, but word still reached me through distant relatives and old family friends. My parents had burned through what little money they had left. The house was gone, their debts were piling up, and without my constant labor to hold everything together, their lives were unraveling. Ethan had lost another job. He blamed the economy, bad luck, and everything else except himself. He had no real savings, no direction, and no skills to rely on. My parents, once so proud and full of control, had been reduced to something they never thought they'd become. Dependent. Not on me, but on the very son they had raised to never take care of himself. It was poetic. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing who it was. Sure enough, when I played the message, it was my mother. Her voice was tired. Sophia, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know you're angry, and maybe we deserve that. But things are hard, and I just wanted to hear your voice. Your father hasn't been doing well. Ethan, he's trying, but he's not like you. He doesn't have your strength. I almost laughed at that. Now, after years of telling me I was just a girl, that I had no real importance, they had the audacity to admit that I was the strong one, that I had been the one holding everything together. She sighed heavily. I won't ask for anything, Sophia. I just wanted to say that I miss you. A long pause. I hope you're doing well. Then, silence. I stared at my phone, feeling nothing. No sadness, no guilt. Only a strange sense of finality. Maybe in her own way she meant it. Maybe she really did miss me, but it didn't matter anymore. Whatever realization she had come to was years too late. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. And mine led me to a future without them. I deleted the voicemail. I had no space in my life for people who only saw my worth once they needed me. My success wasn't theirs to share. My peace wasn't theirs to disrupt. I was done. For good. Years passed, and the past became nothing more than a distant memory. I had built a life that was entirely my own, a life filled with peace, success, and freedom. My business flourished beyond anything I had imagined, and I surrounded myself with people who truly valued me. I traveled, I laughed, I made decisions for myself without the weight of obligation dragging me down. My parents and Ethan, they became nothing more than names I used to know. I never reached out, and they never tried again after my mother's last voicemail. Maybe they finally understood that I wasn't coming back. Maybe they had run out of excuses, out of stories, out of reasons to believe I still owed them something. One day, while I was sitting in a cafe, sipping coffee and reading a book, a familiar voice interrupted my peace. "Sophia?" I looked up, and there he was, Ethan. He looked different, older, more tired, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. His clothes weren't the expensive, brand-new outfits he used to flaunt. His hair was unkempt, his face thinner than I remembered. For the first time in his life, he looked ordinary. He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Wow, you look really good." I just stared at him, waiting. He sighed and sat down across from me without asking. "I don't want anything," he said quickly, as if reading my mind. I saw you, and I thought maybe I should say hi." I didn't respond. I had nothing to say. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom and Dad are okay, I guess. They're still living in that tiny apartment. They don't talk about you much anymore." He gave a small, humorless chuckle. "I think it's because they know they messed up." Still, I said nothing. He exhaled, looking down at the table. "I get it now, you know. What it was like for you. How unfair it all was." He glanced up at me, his expression almost pleading. I wish I could go back and change things. For a moment, I wondered if this was what I had always wanted, an apology, an acknowledgement, proof that they finally saw me. But as I looked at him, sitting there, lost and unsure, I realized something. I didn't need it. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his guilt. I didn't need his regrets. I had already moved on. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and set it down. Then I met his eyes and smiled. Not out of kindness, not out of anger. Just indifference. "I hope you figure things out, Ethan," I said simply. Then I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked away. I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was completely, truly free.